So Airbus in the UK has a long heritage going back 100 years. What we're trying to do for the future through the ability and the capability of our engineers here is really to secure it for the next 100 years here in the UK. And the government, with its industrial strategy that's looking really long term, is also really helpful. There's a stability there that of course business likes. The diplomatic network and the trade policy supporting our sales is really important. And the UK is absolutely, for us, a critical part of that growth industry globally.
Hello, I'm Katie Pilbeam and this is Connected UK, where I explore why Britain is the partner of choice for global business. Airbus, the world's leading aircraft manufacturer, has been investing billions in the UK over the past decade, securing more than 14,000 skilled jobs across 26 of their UK sites. A powerful example of British manufacturing at its best. I'll be speaking with Oriel Petry, who's the Senior Vice President as well as the Group Head of Public Affairs at Airbus, as well as a former UK government advisor, about what makes the UK so competitive when it comes to world-class aerospace, or why that matters for international businesses looking to trade here. Oriel Petry, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So let's talk about Airbus, one of the crown jewels in Britain's advanced manufacturing. Let's talk about the operations and how it all works and what it tells international partners about doing business here in the UK.
So Airbus in the UK has a long heritage going back 100 years. So it is absolutely a part of the UK's long-term competitiveness in aerospace, and that feeds through into today, and as I'm sure as we'll come on to, also into tomorrow. As Airbus, we've got over 14,000 people that we employ here across more than 26 sites. It is our centre of wing excellence, and we're across 4 of the home nations. Almost all of the wings are manufactured here. Either in North Wales, in Broughton near Chester, or in Belfast. But we have R&D sites for commercial aerospace down in Filton near Bristol, and also up in Scotland in Prestwick. We are also the UK's largest satellite manufacturer, and we are in the UK one of the rare countries where we can do everything from design to the manufacturing of satellites. That's driven out of Stevenage and Portsmouth. We also have a Surrey satellites operation that does low Earth orbit satellites. And then we also have a cyber business that's run out of Newport that's doing cyber work. And then finally, in the what is called the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor, we have our helicopter operations where we've done a new large investment, and that is because we supply the majority of air ambulance helicopters, but also the police with helicopters. So really broad stretch of what we do here in the UK, all of it built on a really strong heritage. You know, we are in Broughton because that's where we were at the beginning of the Second World War. We are in Filton near Wales because we're there from the very beginning of flight, and we're now in Belfast, which goes right back to the Wright brothers in their first thinking about aerospace. So it's a really wide footprint of technology that is really cutting edge, built on a heritage that goes back more than 100 years. And of course, what we're trying to do for the future through the ability and the capability of our engineers here is really to secure it for the next 100 years here in the UK.
And you mentioned the components there. So you rightly say about the wings, of course, a plane can't fly without the wings, but also you mentioned the satellites, the helicopter support as well. You mentioned cyber too. When you think of all these components, what do you think Britain does well in terms of bringing all those together? Why does it work so well?
Well, it's partly this idea of heritage, and I mean also the sort of clusters. Of course, aerospace and in particular Airbus isn't doing this in isolation. We have a really deep supply chain. We have 2,000 suppliers. About half of them are actually small businesses, many of them family owned. So there is that tradition of engineering that we've got that feeds through, as I say, from generation to generation through the businesses that we have. But there's also a really strong, as we often talk about, university ecosystem. So we have many, many relationships with universities across the country, often linked to where our sites are. But I mean, Cranfield University is an example. Cyber work in Newport is done a lot in collaboration with Cardiff. It takes our people 7 years to get fully qualified from the start of their degree all the way through to being able to work on our cyber work. So I think the ecosystem, the history, the engineering skills, the universities, it's that mix of being able to deliver, as I said, for today, but also looking forward through the cutting edge research that needs to be done for the future to ensure that the UK can remain competitive for future generations. And that's true across the sectors that we cover, whether it's defence or space or civil aircraft.
And that's beginning with students.
It always starts, I mean, not only with students, I mean, actually, it starts much earlier than that. So we have a lot of programmes for school children even. It's all the way through. But yes, obviously, the younger generation, the many young careers people that we took in about over 500 last year alone. So that is a huge part of what we're doing. And as you say, the link between us and therefore the universities is really important. Quite a lot of our apprentices are doing partly the work in the factories, but at the same time, they're also learning in the local university or the local college, and that link is really important. Maybe I'd mention one other thing, which I think is not unique to the UK, but it's very important. There's something called the Catapult Network, and there the idea is that you're not just looking at early skills, but you're looking at the way in which you adapt your skills for industrial use. And so we work very closely with one of them down in the southwest near our site in Bristol, which is around composites and particularly around composite work that we do. And in Sheffield, there's also work that we do with the catapults there. And in Wales, again, we're looking at robotics and how we can industrialise in the most effective way. So I think that sort of halfway house between universities and industry that's gone through the Catapult Network, which is government funded, is another pillar of the way in which we are really driving the innovation for the future.
Let's maybe talk about the suppliers, because there's nearly 2,000 of them that gets the whole system moving. And also with that, there's 80,000 indirect jobs that are all making this function as well.
Well, of course, the talent there is critical. I mean, in our industry, as in any other, the talent is where it begins and where it ends. And so we do have a very strong pool of talent. And in terms of more broadly thinking about skills, as I say, not just for today, but also for the future innovation that we need to drive, what we've found really useful over the last few years is to work very closely with the government on something that's called the Aerospace Technology Institute, which is specifically around R&D in aerospace, which is there for the whole of the UK sector, not just Airbus. And what that allows us to do is really work with government to think about what is the basic R&D that we need through the universities, but also how we then apply that on our site. So we're thinking about what we call the wing of tomorrow, which needs to be a longer wing with a folding wingtip, so slightly different to these wings here. And that's to make it as aerodynamic as possible, because for the next generation of aircraft, we want the fuel efficiency to be 20 to 30% better than the last generation of aircraft. So that Aerospace Technology Institute also allows us to really foster the skills very much tailored to what we need. And there's great programs that we're doing also in space out of Stevenage and out of Portsmouth. And then we have many apprentices in our helicopter business as well. So skills is a really big part of what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Let's maybe talk a bit more about government trade policy as well, because you were in government for some 20 years, I believe. Do you feel like you're getting the support you need in this regard?
So I spoke a lot about partnership, didn't I, with the government, and that's very much about domestic growth, as we've discussed. So around universities, skills policy, around making the environment for business as good as it can be. But yes, you're absolutely right that we do really rely on the government also to support us in our sales across the globe. I mean, we sell to all continents across the globe. In commercial aircraft, defence obviously is quite different because it's governments that buy. So there, what the UK government can do for us is really critical, as in build the relationships, the government-to-government relationships, to make sure that our products are bought overseas. But in fact, it's true for us on civil aircraft as well. It's amazing how many of the airlines remain very closely linked to foreign national governments. So actually, the diplomatic network and the trade policy supporting our sales is really important. We've got great examples of that, whether it's Turkey or India, in fact. But more formal trade work, such as the free trade agreements, obviously is also important. So after the free trade agreement with India, there were a number of deals that we did. And then the more broader sort of trade relationship and the recognition of qualifications, but also of parts, and the free movement of parts is obviously really important to us. Digital customs, all of those things that can make the flow of our products easier through trade policy is critical. We've been fortunate in aerospace that since 1979, under the WTO, we've had 0% tariffs on aircraft and aircraft parts. That's very unusual. That's something that we would really, really like to retain, and we're really glad that we are in a position at the moment where we've got 0% tariffs on aircraft and aircraft parts. So trade policy is critical for a business like ours. Putting together the wings going into the aircraft, but then also selling the ready aircraft across the globe, absolutely critical. And for that, we do need the structures that government offers.
As we were saying before, you've got UK-built wings, you've got military aircraft, you've got satellites as well. You've described aerospace as vital to the UK's national security. Can you maybe just embellish on that, if you would?
Well, of course, today and so far, we've been focused on keeping our citizens safe, I suppose. We're moving into a world where that is slightly changing. And I suppose what I meant there is that the skills that we have across our business, very, very technical skills, whether it's in cyber or satellites, which includes military satellites, but also aircraft, there is a commonality to those skills that as the world changes and perhaps the UK needs to think about its economy in a different way, it's really important that you have maintained those skills. I think probably the clearest example of the transferability of skills and why it's so important that a country like the UK continues to foster advanced manufacturing probably is in 2020, when we were part of the consortium that was pulled in to build ventilators for the NHS that was very short of ventilators. So in a catapult building, an AMRC, Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre building in Broughton, we then moved the robotics that we're testing for our next industrial line, cleared the whole of the space, and then started to build ventilators.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of hope you don't have to do it, but it's a really clear example of where underlying skills and capability, which we take for granted in many Western nations, but of course, if you look across the globe, lots of other countries don't have that capability to redirect what they do. In a slightly less dramatic way, maybe, thinking about it now, we think of it and we call it dual use. And so the technology that we're driving in civil aerospace influences what you do in defence. And as I say, the ventilator example is one where we did that really effectively, where suddenly the objectives changed and suddenly it wasn't, I mean, apart from anything, no aircraft obviously was flying, but at that moment, what the UK needed was to have our skills building ventilators for the NHS rather than building wings for aircraft.
Can you tell me more about the importance of Britain's sovereign capabilities?
So when I talk about our people, there's a huge sense of pride in that we think of ourselves as delivering sovereign capability for the UK, whether that's in our cyber work that we do in Newport, or whether it's the satellite work that we do, military satellite communications that we do out of Stevenage and Portsmouth, or whether it's the low Earth orbit satellites that we do out of Guildford. A huge sense of pride in offering that sovereign capability, and something that we really relish developing further with the government. For space, what we've seen internationally is that the European approach to space, which was very much focused on GEO, with very high, big satellites that used to give us news from space, is being disrupted by an approach that's much more low Earth orbit. And there, what we think the sovereign capability that can be delivered will be done best through a joint venture, a European joint venture, a bit like we've done on civil aircraft in space. That's where we think the future sits. And of course, as part of that, just as with our civil aerospace, pooling of sovereignty, there will be aspects of that space sovereignty that will stay at UK's eyes only and be part of what the UK wants to deploy when and where. And another area of sovereign capability is our heavy lifts, the A400M aircraft, which again is critical to the RAF's capabilities and how it uses across the world. It's very versatile. Heavy lift is one of the areas that NATO and Europe has identified it needs more of. And again, going back to this pride that we have with Airbus, this is the aircraft that, for instance, was part of the evacuation of Kabul in 2021. So there's a whole breadth of what we would call sovereign capability that we deliver in partnership with the government. It's a really key piece of what we do, where the innovation drives us. And again, as I mentioned before, where that innovation that you drive in military then feeds into the civil and vice versa.
Airbus is committed to 100% sustainable aviation fuel capability by 2030. Do you think that's feasible? And if it is, do you think that the UK government is supporting you, given that they are a clean energy government, if you like?
Well, the debate, of course, today is about keeping our citizens safe through our technology. We also, as a business, know that longer term, the decarbonisation of aerospace remains a really critical technology. It may not be in the forefront today with everything that's going on in the world as much as it was a few years ago, but we know that it has to be a key component of what we do in the future. So I mentioned the wings that we're developing here for the next generation of aircraft. That's driven by a desire to be more sustainable, to use less fuel. You're completely right that at the moment we already are certified to fly all our aircraft with a mix of up to 50% of sustainable aviation fuel, and that we have made a commitment to be at 100% by 2030. In fact, an awful lot of the work that's going on in terms of certifying the sustainable aviation fuel, but also testing the fuel's capability to be at 100% by 2030 is being done here out of Bristol. So again, an example of great R&D and capability that's being run out of the UK. We are confident that we'll be able to get there from a technological point of view. The challenge for us is the access, as it is for the airlines, is access to enough sustainable aviation fuel. At the moment, we don't have enough coming into the system to ensure that there's enough of a supply for the demand that the airlines are going to have for it. Which is why something like the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, that's trying to create this market, a revenue certainty mechanism, is so important. That is going to be critical. I think the technology will get there, but the access to sustainable aviation fuel is the big question, not just for the UK, by the way, internationally. And then there's things about certification of SAF, which again is international, because if you're flying from the UK to the US, you need to have fuel that's recognised. It's a very complicated issue, but technologically we think we can get there. And in fact, we have in 2022, we flew this military aircraft, the A400M, on 100% sustainable aviation fuel through the engine. So we know that we can do it, but it is a challenge. The second challenge then is longer term, which is around a hydrogen-fueled aircraft. And there again, the technology is much of it's being led out of the UK, particularly around hydrogen fuel cells and liquid hydrogen. That's on a slightly longer trajectory now than we'd hoped. And again, it's because of the environment around us, because it will require a number of changes within the ecosystem that aren't there yet. But these technologies absolutely are critical for the long term. We're very aware of that, and continues to be a real focus for R&D, not just in the UK, but everywhere.
Exciting. And when you're speaking to an aerospace company in the world, whether that be Asia or Australia or wherever it might be, what's your message to them about doing business with the UK?
Well, I think, and I mean, we've covered much of it, but if I sort of summarise it, I think the UK has this really strong capability that's been built up over generations, and a really deep knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. So there's that, we sometimes, as I say, take it for granted, but that heritage and the depth of that knowledge and the depth of that capability that then runs through the universities, that runs through our factories, that runs through the supply chain, is something that a lot of countries envy. I think the other thing that we would say at the moment, the government with its industrial strategy that's looking really long term, is also really helpful. There's a stability there that, of course, business likes. So I think that stability, that long-term stability and certainty is important. And I mentioned before the Aerospace Technology Institute, the R&D funding that we have for that going out 10 years is impressive. I don't know any other countries that's done the same thing in the same way. So I think that's another example. The third, I think, is the skills. So this is the ability, the universities, the link through the universities into the factories, into the innovation. And maybe a fourth, having worked for many, many years on foreign direct investment, there is an element of a softer side to decisions that are made by businesses. And the UK, particularly in aerospace, really does live and breathe this pride. And if you go to one of our sites, as I say, where you've got generations that have worked there, this sense of pride in what they do, both locally, but how it contributes to a global system is impressive. And the factories that we have in the UK remain productive and good against productivity levels internationally. So I think there is that softer, willingness to deliver, I think, which is also attractive for us here in the UK.
Okay, and finally, what are your plans for Britain and the future of Airbus here in the UK?
What we're doing today, which is the ramp up to 75 aircraft a month for the delivery of that 8,500 backlog of aircraft that airlines are waiting for, is driven out of the UK, because obviously you need the wings for that delivery of 8,500 aircraft. But I think what's really interesting about what we're trying to do here is to really secure the UK's part of the next generation of aircraft, for the next generation bestseller, what we call single aisle aircraft, which is the A320, which is what most of us will use to go on holiday across Europe, but even further afield. And we're doing that by doing the R&D for the wings here in the UK for the next generation. So there's a huge amount of investment that's going into that. There's investment that's going into space, in particular in new areas where we've moved from GEO, so very high level satellites, to LEO, where we want to do new things. We are looking at investment into Belfast, where we've acquired the operations of Spirit, where the wings for our smallest aircraft are made. The same is true for Scotland. So the UK and its aerospace footprint that we have here is absolutely critical. This is an industry that is growing substantially. We think we're going to need about 40,000 new aircraft by 2040. It's got a compound annual growth rate of over 7%, depending on how you measure it. And the UK is absolutely, for us, a critical part of that growth industry globally.
Oriel Petry, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for watching as well. And if you want more on this topic, there's more episodes on Connected UK.